Hey, Malva.
Hello, Malva.
Here's Malva.
Hi, Malva.
Yes. Malva, you hear me?
Hi, yeah, I was muted. I'm sorry.
Gia just told me that there are 115 participants in this webinar.
Okay, wow, that's amazing.
Mm.
Truly.
Let's see how many show up.
Will we see all the participants or just the panel, us panel here? You know, sometimes in these things, you don't actually see. I can't hear you, Silke.
Gia doesn't hear you. She's
Silke?
muted.
Sorry. I think it's only us because it's too many. So otherwise you would be clicking through too many slides to see. So the setting is only the panelists are visible on the screen.
Okay.
Here, I let you decide when to start, okay? Because I don't know how many people are in the wait, if there is anything like a waiting room or if people are.
Yes, so welcome everybody. I think I mean, people can just come and join us. Yeah, so it will be really great to start, I think.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome. On behalf of White Plus, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, COVID-19 and the care economy. What do we see? What do we call for? What do we fight for? And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in this globalized world. White Plus is a European network of associations and individual activists. Some of you may know it already, that fights for women's rights as part of a larger struggle for social justice, sustainable livelihoods, and human rights. We advocate for changing European policies that affect people in and outside of Europe. And we understand Europe as larger than the European Union. White Plus aims to promote collective feminist movement building in Europe and in solidarity with like-minded around the world. My name is Silke Steinhilber, and I'm a member of White Plus and a member of the group that prepared these webinars. And I'm an independent researcher and activist on gender justice and non-discrimination. Before I start introducing the topic and the speakers of this webinars, there's a few practicalities that I would like to mention. We have an hour and a half, and after our speakers' contributions, we hope to have enough time to answer questions and have an interactive conversation with you. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the chat section at the bottom of your panel. You can also use that or express your intention to speak in person if you would like to raise your question. And you can also use that if you'd like to share any work pertaining to this seminar, any links or any announcements. but really only work that is related to the topic of this webinar, please. Unfortunately, for those of you who are joining us via Facebook, unfortunately, it's impossible to ask questions via Facebook. So just for you to know. And also, we are very much committed to a civilized feminist exchange and interaction. And as organizers, we reserve our right to exclude anyone who uses offensive or discriminatory language, or who abuses the space in an undemocratic or anti-feminist way. We will be live streaming this webinar for your information, and we'll be making it available afterwards, including the slides. And if you would like to remain anonymous while asking a question or comment, we suggest that you rename yourself with anonymous or give yourself another pseudonym in the Zoom profile. About the topic of the webinar, it's almost a year, or it's pretty much exactly a year that the COVID-19 pandemic has been with us and has exacerbated social, economic, and gender inequalities across the world. Sorry. Fortunately, many millions have survived the illness, but unfortunately, millions by now have died around the globe. And many of us, and in my impression, women in particular, are exhausted, both by the fight against the pandemic for those who have been or who are in the front lines, but also by the lockdown measures and by trying to combine paid work and care work, and by the political debates around the response to the pandemic and the recovery planning. The COVID-19 has made abundantly clear that without the paid and unpaid care work that fosters people's physical and emotional well-being, societies cannot survive. Gender and care have been central categories in the global experience with the pandemic, as much with respect to the impact of the virus as with the consequences. And at White Plus, in observing this, we saw an urgent need to create spaces for feminist reflection about what this so-called new normal could mean of life in and after the pandemic. We have therefore created a series of 3 webinars today and in the coming 2 weeks. And we want to reflect about some of what we see as the main topics, or as some main topics of feminist concern. We would like to use this space together with our guest speakers and with all of you who are joining us virtually to reflect on what is happening and how we can learn from it. What are the lessons and the conclusions that we can learn for our larger struggle for social justice, sustainable livelihoods, and human rights? Today's webinar will kind of lay the ground of these reflections about care and COVID-19 with respect to paid and unpaid care work, and a feminist reflection about recovery packages. What are our feminist demands in these discussions about building back better, as it's sometimes termed right now? Next week's webinar will address care chains and the conditions of migrant care work during the pandemic. And 2 weeks from today, we will discuss the rise of authoritarianism, racism, and the rollback of human rights and women's rights. We will discuss how governments are using the COVID-19 crisis for anti-democratic goals, and in particular to cut back women's sexual and reproductive rights. We really see this series of webinars as part of our larger efforts of feminists like us and you to develop alternative recovery responses and advocate for gender justice and human rights. As White Plus, we are convinced that this post-pandemic new normal, from a feminist point of view, cannot mean any return to austerity and the financialization and privatization of care and the control of women's bodies. We believe that care, solidarity, and human rights for all have to be and are key in the recovery. And we invite you to join this reflection space and to join our struggle. In today's webinar, I'm joined by 3 speakers and friends, and I'm very happy to see you here. And I will be briefly introducing the speakers and then tell you how we are planning to conduct the webinar. We are joined by Sarah Cantillon, we are joined by Ulla Björnberg, and by Elizabeth Klatzer. And let me introduce the 3. Sarah Cantillon is a professor of economics and gender at the Glasgow School of Business and Society and director of the WISE Center for Economic Justice. She has really extensive research and policy experience nationally and internationally on feminist economics and on care, the key topic of this webinar. She has advised, for example, the Irish Prime Minister. And her main areas of research in general are equality, poverty, care, and gender. Ulla Björnberg is joining us from Sweden. Ulla is Professor Emeritus at the Department of Sociology and Work Science in Gothenburg. And her research areas are family in relation to policy, welfare, and work, and intergenerational relationships in asylum-seeking children and families. She's also been a long-standing White Plus member and has conducted several projects on family life and family policy in Europe and the Nordic countries, and on social organizations among immigrants. Today, she's also joined by Malva Staff, who's a feminist activist and member of GADIP. Ulla is also a member of GADIP, member organization of White Plus. And both will present the recent GADIP study on the gendered effects of COVID-19 in the women-dominated health workforce. And we are thirdly joined by Elizabeth Klatzer from Austria. Elizabeth has many years of experience in working in research and activism and consultancy in gender-responsive budgeting and gender justice in budgetary and economic policies. And in that, she has often collaborated with White Plus. She is one of the authors of the study initiated by the Greens in the European Parliament about the gender impact assessment of the European Commission's proposal for EU recovery, and will share her knowledge about this study with us. So Sarah, Ulla, Elizabeth, very nice to have you here, and thanks for joining our webinar. And Malva, of course, as well. How are we going to do this? Sarah is invited to kind of set the frame for our reflection around care and the pandemic. And Sarah and I will have a little bit of a back and forth in questions around this. Then we will move to Ulla. As I said, Ulla will share a recent GADIP study on healthcare workers in Sweden. And then we will hear from Elizabeth about the recovery packages and the feminist assessment of recovery policies in order to guide our thinking about feminist responses. And then we will go full circle and have one last exchange with Sarah about possible openings for feminist economic and policy advocacy in the recovery from the pandemic. So let's turn to Sarah. Sarah, I'm very glad to have you here with us. Thanks for joining us. I know that you have done a lot of research on care and the economy, and on the way how, I would say, dominant understandings or misunderstandings maybe of care have shaped our perception and analysis of the pandemic and the economy in the pandemic. Many have already argued that the pandemic has served or serves as a magnifying lens, so to speak, for understanding gender equality in the economy, or gender inequality, I should rather say. Help us a little bit to better understand what that means. What has been the central role of care in the functioning of the economy and society? And why are feminist economists like you and us invite decision makers to question mainstream views on the economy? What's the role of care, Sarah? You need to, yeah. I'm going mute, you unmute.
Sorry, I think there should be a new T-shirt after all this pandemic is over, and you're muted or unmute yourself. It's a feature of every single Zoom call.
I think that's very feminist. Unmute yourself. We should do that.
Anyway, I think, Silke, that's a very good place to start to leave COVID-19 and the already beleaguered care economy, even pre-pandemic, aside for a moment and focus on the central role of care to economic and social well-being. I think that despite the fact that feminist academics have long highlighted the way care enables economies, societies, and households to function, it's persistently and pervasively under-recognized and undervalued. And it seems to me that despite its centrality, there's a kind of a general ambivalence about care in most societies. That care is often thought of and treated as an essentially private matter. So I think in questioning kind of mainstream economic views on care, I think you need to go back to almost the fundamentals of understanding key characteristics or aspects of care. And I think that they are that care is essential, that care is relational, and that it has a different temporal logic. So being cared for is not only vital for survival in infancy, early childhood, or at times of illness or vulnerability, but it's necessary for human development and well-being throughout our lives. And I think it's this reality of both the dependency and the interdependency of humans that stands in sharp contrast to the core concept of self-interested individualism that's kind of the bedrock of economic theory. I think the assumption that the prototypical human is an autonomous agent, and in economics we call him rational economic man, and it is a man, who is able to choose from an array of options limited only by budget constraints. And this has been long criticized by feminist economists, because what they or we are arguing is that this focus on individual autonomy directs attention away from the connectedness and the complexities of interdependent relationships. And it also ignores the limited autonomy of children, the elderly, and others who crucially depend on the decisions of others. I think further, this theoretical framework poorly characterizes the lives of those whose economic circumstances are structured by factors beyond their own personal control. It hides the fact that many people have limited opportunity to self-determine their lives. The emphasis on choice rather than on conditions that underlie choices misleads by giving the impression that outcomes can be adequately understood without looking at key structural circumstances. So, for example, in how cultural perceptions and social norms influence, social norms on gender roles influence economic life. And we can see that very clearly in relation to caring, I think, but also in terms of gendered legal and social institutions and through direct and indirect discrimination. And in my view, the contradictions of this kind of notion of self-interested individualism, the constraints of choice and the pervasiveness of traditional gender roles, these all coalesce around issues of care. The second aspect I was talking about was the kind of the relational nature of much care work. And Joan Tronto often makes the distinction between caring for and caring about. And we can distinguish that often between what we call primary and secondary care. So while a childcare worker or a nurse or a teacher have to care for those for whom they have a care duty, their primary purpose isn't maintaining a mutually supporting relationship. And so we can see why those secondary care roles are commodifiable. They can happen to a certain extent with restrictions in the marketplace. but key issues arise around the 3 R's, around respect, recognition, and reward. But the kind of care work that's involved in primary care relationships, however, I believe is non-commodifiable, and it's inalienable, as Kathleen Lynch has often said in her writings. That is, the performance of the task cannot be changed from the person who performs it. It can't be assigned to somebody else without undermining the premise of mutuality that is at the heart of the relationship. So, for example, you can't pay somebody to go out for a meal with a friend of yours without fundamentally changing the nature of the event. Or you can't pay someone to go and visit your mother in hospital and claim the visit is from you. So I think that relationality of care makes it quite different from other forms of work. And lastly, I suppose I'd say, I think that care has a different time dimension. It has a different temporal logic than that we think about as part of the market economy. So that certain types of care can't be delivered or packaged in a very neat, pre-planned way. It takes time, it takes presence. Sometimes there's no clear boundaries, and yeah, it just can't happen in that kind of commodified, measurable way, or as they say, trying to McDonaldize care. Because what that does, it deprives the carer of the connection and the regard for the overall welfare of the care recipient. And I think this applies actually to both, obviously to primary care, but also to secondary care work. And it's very evident in professional care solutions through the application of a business model, which strips the carer's role back to basic functions condensed into 15-minute time slots. I don't know what the situation is in Germany or Austria or Sweden, the other panelists, but for example, in the UK and Ireland, many companies have 15-minute time visits, which are sufficient only to check if medication has been taken or if an individual is up and dressed. And this model continues despite evidence that such low levels of care compromises the dignity of the elderly, somebody who's disabled, somebody who is in a vulnerable position, as well as placing unfair pressure on the home care worker themselves. They're the kind of fundamental characteristics that I think are important to keep in mind when we begin to talk about care, both paid and unpaid care work.
I think some of the things, some of the concepts that you have mentioned are so, yeah, I mean, they just jump into your face, remembering last year's debates about the pandemic response, the questions of interdependency, self-interest, responsibility, caring for, caring about. Maybe you can go a bit more into detail about what the pandemic or how the pandemic has made us realize or not the importance of care, and what is it that we as societies have experienced or learned through the pandemic about care?
We hope we learn, don't we? We hope we all learn. I suppose I think a big thing that the pandemic has done in relation to care has been to make the invisible visible. So it has very much underscored the extent to which unpaid and paid care work underpin the global economy. And I think, as you said earlier, Silke, many feminists across many different disciplines, such as Federici, who I saw there was a whole article about her in the New York Times the other day, that her work has come back into vogue with all of this. The people like Diane Elson, Nancy Foley, etc., have recognized the importance of care and have been saying this for a long time. But perhaps, that recognition is much wider now because of our experience. I mean, maybe it has brought home to people in a direct, almost visceral way, how vulnerable our society is, how unsustainable the current model is, how interdependent we all are. And, perhaps it has also clarified our dependence on low paid or unpaid work. And, because sometimes the way of learning is through personal experience. And I suppose there's been a couple of aspects to it, like, you know, care is typically delivered through a mixed economy of welfare provision, formally through the state, the market, or the voluntary sector, informally through the family. But during COVID, the balance of this provision has shifted dramatically from the state/market to the family. And I think that's had a profound effect on all our lives, particularly on women's lives, but on all lives. And it has also shone a light on the amount of care work that women carry. I mean, and again, both paid and unpaid. And I think that this has been epitomized through women's dual roles in paid care. Is, you know, 70% of global frontline health workers are women. And also because of school closures and childcare closures, the heightened care of needs of older people, overwhelmed health services, etc., that has increased unpaid care work as well, which was already unevenly distributed. And this has had knock-on effects in terms of reducing paid working hours and, of course, increasing stress. And it looks as though, but there are real fears at any rate, that the pandemic is going to have a catastrophic effect on women's participation in the paid labour market after we pass back to something regarding normal. I think another interesting aspect of learning is recognizing the significance of intergenerational interdependence and the crucial role that grandparents play in enabling parents to participate in the labour market. I think, you know, globally, whether part of the household or not, grandparents and grandmothers in particular, as providers of childcare, is a common and significant form of intergenerational family support. They're a big part of the jigsaw childcare arrangements. I think pre-pandemic figures for some European countries and for the US show that more than a quarter of families have grandparents who undertake child care. And even in countries where there's a lot of public childcare provision, like Sweden, Denmark, France, they still are very involved in childcare, which I think harks back to my earlier point about the relational nation of care. So I suppose in terms of learning, well, in relation to that, I suppose the pandemic has forced a revision of stereotypical assumptions around older people as vulnerable or frail, or as the recipients of care rather than the providers of care, because their contribution to care has been made much more visible, as it's been temporarily suspended or withdrawn because of social distancing requirements. So, I don't know, just to finish, in terms of learning, what can we say? Will it be, hopefully, that we learn that care is a justice issue, that it's not just about individual choice in the private realm, that it's not just a social, but rather an economic issue, that it's not just a gender inequality issue, although it is, of course, that, but that there are other intersectionalities at play, including race and class, and, you know, that we might learn in terms of the care work needs to be reframed as a public good.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It just sparks, I mean, for me at least, it sparks so many different ideas, what you just have put so eloquently. One interesting contradiction I find is, you said the pandemic has made the invisible visible, but on the other hand, you said how much it has shifted care work back into the families that are in some way also closed environments. So it has to some extent made the invisible visible, and at the same time made a lot of work again invisible, because it's taken place in families in a condition of lockdown.
Yeah.
So I think there are really so many interesting contradictions. Also, the issue of intergenerational independence just made me think about I don't know in other countries, but these discussions about the protecting the elderly and the responsibility of the young, and who is suffering the most and who is affected the most. I mean, it depends on how the discussions, the different turns of the discussions. So I think there are really so many different aspects to explore, and on what you said. we will come back to you later on and open the conversation also for the others. I think it's I wanted to highlight one other aspect that you said about the at the very beginning, the logic of caring and the tensions between dependency and autonomy, and the caring for and caring about, and the reliance of care work as not only a profession, but also a internal logic of those who provide care. Because that was one of the aspects that struck me so profoundly in reading the GADIP study about paid care workers. These the pressures to go to work as a paid care worker, despite, or the need to create an income, and the need to create or to care for those you are responsible for, to care for your co-workers, and at the same time the danger for yourself and for your family. So I think these tensions will jump into all our faces when we now hear Ulla presenting the results of the study that GADIP has done on paid care workers in Sweden. It focuses really on structural problems in the world of paid care work. We know that women play a greater role than men in care work, including in health and elderly care. And Sarah has also emphasized that again. I think it's, some of you may think, oh, Sweden has been such an outlier in its handling of the pandemic. Yet I found it really fascinating to see in many aspects how emblematic the Swedish case still is. It's really this tension of the neoliberal logic in care provision, despite the fact that all of us outside tend to think, oh, Sweden is such a welfare state, the model welfare state. And then you look at the experience collected in the GADIP study about the neoliberal logic in what we see as the Swedish welfare state, and really the reliance on women's commitment to care, and how that caused unbelievable suffering during the pandemic. Ulla, I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and share the results of your study on Swedish health and long-term care workers.
Thank you. I want to talk mainly on the female workforce within the pandemic industry, so to say. And the study that we have made is mainly made by Malva, who has collected a lot of material during the pandemic that is on newspaper articles, the statistics provided on the various happenings. We had a very rapid spread of the virus in Sweden, also in many other countries, but it somehow has provided a shock in society of how to understand what is going on actually. The death rate in February now by the end is almost 13,000, and this is not the lowest in or the highest in Europe. On the contrary, we are in a lower range actually. There was an excess mortality among the elderly. More than 54% of those above 74 years have died. There is also an excess mortality among migrants, especially migrants with a refugee background. This is shown by a study that was recently published, and it's not in our report. But among refugees, in particular, refugee migrants, the 3 times higher death rates compared to migrants from Western countries. So when we analyze the situation of the care workers, we have to put their situation in a bigger, in a wider context. So if we look at the inequalities in the living conditions, many of them live in segregated housing areas that are densely populated, that have long distance to work, and they have to work to move around in the city and go to their workplaces. Work at home is no option for the health and care staff. It was a massive stress in general for them in their working conditions. If we focus on this within those assistant nurses who worked in the care of elderly. Among this category of health workers, 91% of women. And this category of health workers, many of them are employed on call, so to say. They have very low salaries and very insecure income. And also their insurance, sickness insurance, is quite poor. This means that many of these women had high incentives to go to work, despite when they were feeling not so good. And it was also a moral obligation among them because they knew that their colleagues were very stressed and they needed the support of the care assistants. Anyhow, because they were forced to go to work, there were also very many sick leaves and also sickness attendance then. What it turned out early on was that there was a lack of protective equipment. And so they had to make mouth protection by themselves and make protective clothes on themselves in the beginning of the situation. And when there was protective equipment coming up, there were lack of information on how to use the protective equipment. That is, there was quite poor information on contamination risks, hygiene, and so on. And there were many who were not aware of that they shouldn't come from a room with sick patients in COVID into rooms where people who were not sick in COVID. And this was also what was shown in one article that showed that there was a sort of distribution staircase according to the hierarchy. So the doctors first and the nurses then, and then further on down the staircase, so to say. And there were also guidelines that were not understandable. For many of these women were migrants, and in the stress situation, maybe they were not clearly guided with information and explanation on how to work. Now I've talked about the working conditions, and then we also have to look into the structural context for health and how it's organized in Sweden. It's like a professional hierarchy. On the national level, there is a provision of information and guidance through the Public Health Agency. And they give the guidelines on television every day and how to protect yourself and so on. And then we have the regional level, which is responsible for the medical and hospital care. We have 24 regions, and they have to organize the health work in the hospitals and medicine. And then the local level, which is responsible for the primary care in elderly care homes, for instance, and for home help service. There are 290 local communities who provide this care work. And in a recent publication, a study, it was shown that this division of labor on the regionals in the geography was not so good. It didn't work well because, for instance, in the primary care homes, they had no employed doctors or medicine information, so they had to call on the phone in the elderly home, call on the phone to a doctor saying, I have a patient here who is suffering so and so, and the doctor made a diagnosis on the phone, didn't see the patient, and sometimes suggested palliative care to a person they haven't seen. And this was just a scandal in the society. And when I talked about the lack of protective equipment, it was due to the philosophy, the economic philosophy that you should have provision just on time. This means that they haven't created a stock of equipments in the primary care units and in hospitals also maybe. It was a little bit different between different regions. And but the stockpiling was also, I could say, a sort of scandal. And yeah, that was my talk. You can ask questions to me if you want to.
I think, I mean, maybe I think the key, really one of the key aspects, and that relates to some of the points that Sarah made up, is this reliance on individual responsibility for self-protection that you just pointed out. I mean, people were forced to create their own protective equipment. So there is a total individual responsibility in an environment of interdependence and a care logic. I find that extremely interesting also, how really these contradictory tensions and these contradictions and tensions within how care is organized in a state, and really the absence of the state did not assume its responsibility, I understand, to provide information, to provide protective equipment, etc. So I find it really fascinating how those, and shocking, how those who are most vulnerable because of their economic situation were those that needed to go to work and contributed, in fact, to the spread, not only among those they cared for, but also among their own families. So we will come back and integrate also questions that are coming from the participants. Let's turn to thinking about what does this...
Hear, Silke.
Sorry?
I don't hear you. Are you saying something to me? My internet connection is not so good, so...
Can everybody else hear me? Okay, so Ulla, I just said we will, can you hear me now, Ulla?
Yes.
Okay, I said we will return and integrate questions in the final round of question and answers with the participants. So let's turn to what does this mean for recovery policies and for our demands. What are what is it that we take from the experiences gathered and the evidence gathered? And on that note, I would like to turn to Elizabeth, who's joining us. I think your experience with respect to gender budgeting and gender impact assessments is absolutely crucial to guide us in thinking about what are feminist demands. And so I would like to invite you to tell us a little bit about your analysis both of the EU recovery package, but also specifically advocacy work that you have been doing in Austria together with others. Let's start with your analysis of the EU recovery plan. I know that together with Azzurra Rinaldi, you too have conducted an analysis of the EU plan, Next Generation EU. And all in this audience at least know that the EU in principle has committed itself to gender mainstreaming in its policies and programs. So that should apply to the Next Generation EU. But is this in fact happening? Has this in fact happened? And what did your analysis of the recovery plan bring out? Please, Elizabeth, tell us.
Thank you very much, Silke. I'm very happy to be here and discuss with you. And what we have heard until now is appalling situations and very difficult, very difficult for care workers. And on the other hand, all this burden on carers, on women, but all people caring. And so you would think that, well, this is the moment to really put care at the center, as it should be. So this is one of the key questions with which we looked at the Next Generation EU. And actually the subtitle says Next Generation EU, this whole recovery program leaves women behind. That's the finding. It's not putting gender equality, women and care at the center. To the contrary, leaving it out, and it seems as if it forgot about, like the EU forgot about the centrality of care and women as well. You mentioned already, Silke, there is very important obligations in the EU, especially in the EU treaty, that the EU is obliged to promote gender equality throughout its activities, and the European Commission has a specific gender equality strategy periodically where it commits to all sorts of policies and promoting of gender equality, especially a dual approach, which means gender mainstreaming, but also targeted funds to achieve gender equality. But what's happening in the EU Recovery Fund? Both is missing. Here, very briefly, from a sector perspective, we know very well which sectors have been affected by the corona crisis: health and social work above all, domestic services, education, accommodation, food services, many sectors with high shares of women. If you look on the other hand, where the focus on the EU Recovery Fund goes, it's not these sectors, but it's different sectors: energy, agriculture, transport, IT, all sectors with a large share of men. So there is a bit of a mismatch on what the problems are and where the money goes. So, of course, it is important to build a gender just society to recover and for purposes of human rights. But the main point is it's also good economic policy. It's better economic policy. For example, macroeconomic losses of gender inequalities and of violence against women are almost as large, like 630 billion euros a year throughout the EU, and compared to the recovery fund, it's not much higher. So gender equality is would be, and focusing on gender equality would make sense to get the economy started again, and especially investing in care infrastructure has much larger employment stimulus effects than any other parts investment. So in this sense, it's simply not good economic policy of what is done within the recovery fund. Let me cite here and show you one finding of a key study. Jérôme Dehenau and Sue Himmelweit are doing great work. And this one is on looking at the employment effects of investing in care infrastructure compared to construction or physical infrastructure. You don't need to understand everything of this picture, but what is key is if you look at either the EU or each country, there is two pillars, and the second one is always much higher than the first one. And it is the second pillar which shows the additional employment effects of investing in care compared to more traditional construction physical infrastructure investment. So I think this slide shows these results from a lot of economic studies. It's simply better economic policy to invest in care. So also in this sense, we have to say the EU kind of failed to do good economic policy, especially in a situation where the care need is so large, but also where unemployment is just huge. And the money would be available. It's simply not spent right so. A lot of funds go directly to EU member states in the Resilience and Recovery Fund. And another finding we had in our study is that it's important to see that the EU, the Commission proposed to link it very closely to the European semester. What is the European semester is the economic policy recommendations from the EU. And they have, in the last decades, slashed care, important care spending, namely, for example, investment in healthcare. There have been multiple recommendations to, under financial sustainability, reduce spending, which has put a lot of countries under strain. And so the tendency is to continue in this direction and not invest enough in this care economy. There has been quite a bit of advocacy to counteract that during the negotiations. Here you see some great women parliamentarians who started a campaign, half of the Corona money for gender equality and women. But we have to say there have been some changes, but still it is only very little what is in this recovery fund. And especially there is no specific funds for gender equality, but under social investment, for example, there is a promotion of financialization, enlarging profit interests in social investment. So it completely goes in the wrong direction.
Thanks for sharing these bad news, let's say. But let's also look at advocacy around national level responses and how these are translated to the national level. And maybe also to illuminate a bit better on the continuity that you were explaining, that austerity measures of the past are kind of continued, and it's hard to advocate for a change in course, which is so necessary. I mean, feminist economists have already for years showed the negative impact of austerity. And when, if not now, we need to change this. So let's look at your experience in advocacy in Austria, where feminists and human rights activists have demanded shift investments in care, or to increase investments in care and social innovation. How have you been successful? Are you being successful? And what would it take to transform a national level recovery packages? What are you advocating for in Austria?
Thank you, Silke. Let me start with Austria is not the only country. In many countries, feminists are coming together and putting together care investment packages. And I think that's very, very important. Oh, I see here the slide is in German. I'm very sorry. But still, I think you get what it is. So in Austria, we have a coalition, the Femme Fiscale, which is a large coalition of feminist organizations, but also others like Advocacy is part of it. And we early on, already in spring, put together a feminist recovery package, which includes, in our case, we demanded 12 billion for this feminist investment package for a good life for all. And it actually includes investments in childcare and education, for a certain amount, investments in care, elderly care, in health, and investments in what we say solidarity and life saving. There is a lot, for example, of psychological counseling or promoting income subsidies for single parents or the lowest on the social ladder, because this would not be important for equality, but also important for economic stimulus. So this was a start, and unfortunately we didn't get heard. A lot of the measures of the government were off the path, not only off in terms of not meeting women's needs, but also not really stimulating the economy, like, for example, reductions of income taxation, which actually did result in higher savings rates, which is not surprising, because who gets income tax reductions? Those who earn more, but not those who need it most. So not all the measures were well. So we decided it's not enough to have a good, economically meaningful package, but also to build strength together. So we recently did a series of 2 conferences to bring together feminist movements and people from all over Austria, and put this feminist recovery plan into the slogan "More for Care," to building or strengthening an economy that cares for all. And the idea is, without women's power, we simply cannot do it. So this was great. It was just last week, the second part of it. And we got a lot of stimulus in the sense of there will be building of care councils in different locations throughout Austria. There will be joint campaigns and basically it's a joint campaign for mobilization of people. Let's see how it goes. But the root is, and we say it so nicely, let's unmute ourselves. I think the slogan could be, let's unmute ourselves to gain again women's power, because it's not enough. We know what is needed, but policymakers know it as well, but they don't do it. They simply represent different interests. And we have a long history of women on which we can, and struggles we can build on, and it doesn't work without the struggles. So let's unmute ourselves and build women's power is the intention to move forward finally.
Let's unmute ourselves. That's great. I like this. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this encouraging stories campaign that is ongoing in Austria. I'm now going to ask a final question to Sarah. So going full circle, as I explained in the beginning, but I would also really like to invite the audience to come up with questions. Please announce or put your questions in the chat. so that we can take them to the panelists. Or if you would like to raise your question personally, please also announce that in the chat so we know and we can unmute you. But Sarah, going back to, I mean, really how we started off, the logic of care and how feminist economists have for such a long time argued to shift the understanding of the economy and to abolish or give up this idea of the economic men and self-reliance, and in favor of and a caring economy and an image of interdependence and respect for the caring logic. Sarah, do you think the pandemic and the post-pandemic phase can offer opportunities to reinforce this struggle, as activists are now calling for in Austria and also elsewhere in the world? Is the post-pandemic, what's the place of feminist demands and demands for a caring economy in the post-pandemic, or in the pandemic we're still experiencing? Because we're dreaming of a post-pandemic, but we're all, or many of us, entering a third, fourth, or whatever wave. So this is far from over. What is the place of feminist analysis and feminist activism, and how can we use the pandemic to for our feminist struggles?
Yeah, well, I suppose, you know, when we talk about building back better, we're kind of, in relation to care, we're implying that care has finally got its moment. And I think that's a really good question. Has care finally come center stage? And I'm not too sure what to say about that. I mean, perhaps it's too early to tell. I'm kind of torn myself. On the more pessimistic side, I think that the response to date by governments, as Elizabeth just outlined there, has been disappointing. Like in terms of her slides, that the response to the sectors, the measures are focused on sectors where there's more male employment, for example, or the UN Women UNDP, you know, that global gender response tracker, that's showing a very disappointing response in relation to care as a percentage of all the social protection and labour market measures. And I think also on the pessimistic side of it, despite, you know, evidence like that Human Rights report, or groups like UK Women's Budget Group, or the groups in Austria and everywhere, that I don't think we've yet got to, you know, what's often called a light bulb moment on behalf of policymakers in relation to the importance of care to the economy. It doesn't seem to be there yet. As I say, there's a caveat in terms of it's still too early. We're still really in, as you say, different waves of the pandemic. But, you know, just as we need a bundle of approaches to responding to the crisis in care, which is intensified but predates the pandemic, opportunities to build back better might follow several routes in addition to just policy change. And again, a little bit like Elizabeth was just saying, women power is one of them, and activism, but also changes in business sector, in business practices, private sector, or in changing social norms. So when I try to look at my more optimistic side, where I naturally am, I can see that there could be opportunities for changing the distribution of care. Because as we already know, all the feminist academics that you've mentioned, and as we've discussed here, women typically undertake most unpaid care work. Gendered norms around unpaid care responsibilities and household distribution of labour are deeply entrenched. However, during the pandemic, there has been some transfer, with men undertaking an increasing share of this additional informal care work. And this is particularly apparent where men are working from home and their partners are essential workers, since schools and childcare and creches and everything are closed. So there is some research that's showing, like for example, in the UK, that about 20% of UK households, fathers working from home have taken on primary care responsibilities as their parents work in critical sectors. And likewise in Turkey, as one survey has shown, a big increase in men's unpaid working couple households. Now, these shifts may be temporary. They could easily reverse with the end of the lockdown and the restart of usual economic activity, but they're also potentially permanent changes. So sometimes when there's a big event, a bit like the increase in female labour force participation during the Second World War, how that reshaped norms and preferences, these forced changes during the pandemic could extend through increased awareness, habit formation, change in social norms, and it could lead to some sustained transformation. This may not be the radical change that we are all hoping for, this audience or feminists who are interested in transforming the world, but at least it might be a change in the right direction. I mean, again, from an optimistic point of view, the pandemic has allowed a kind of a glimpse at human motivations that aren't only driven by competition and self-interest. And that may help constrain or contain this principle of rational economic interest, or also challenge the politics of fear, both of which are central to contemporary capitalism. If we want to create a better world morally, economically, politically, I believe that care has to become a guiding directive in the global order. That we create societies in this, build back better approach, where labour markets, political and cultural institutions recognise the importance of care, and maybe more especially allow people the time, the space, the energy they need to do care work in a way that is resourced and respectful.
So very mixed picture, optimistic, pessimistic. I know that we have already one or some questions coming up in the chat, but I wanted to give Elizabeth and Ulla a chance to respond to what the others had said and what Sarah now said. So maybe Elizabeth, do you want to go, since some of it was immediately or directly to your presentation, and then Ulla also after that, and Malva, if you would like to come in as well to Sarah's very mixed picture of what does building back better mean, and how can we create a place for feminist demands in the debates, policy debates around reconstruction. Elizabeth, do you want to go first?
Yes, I would like to take only one aspect, because but a crucial one. You mentioned, Sarah, the business and the private sector. And I think when we talk, that reminded me that when we talk about care and investments in care, we need to be very careful to also stress what we mean. We do not mean investment of care by profit-seeking corporations. You mentioned earlier in your first input already the pressure on providing care services. Care provided by profit-seeking corporations is always putting profit over people. So this is one of the big fights of our century, actually, or it's because it's already a decades-long tendency, and this reluctance of the EU to invest in care has to do that nowadays still a lot of the care sector is public sector. And we know that the EU rather has a tendency to slash like public sector
Yes.
expenditures, as we know. Even now it's a bit a break, but still with the whole stability pact, etc. So I think the fight for non-profit provision of care needs to be equally at the center. It is one being publicly provided or by other forms of non-profit organizations, etc. There is a lot of cooperatives, there is a lot of different forms, but this form of providing care to have time for high quality care is crucial.
Yeah, could I just come back into that? Can I respond, Silke? Just on that, Elizabeth, absolutely, I agree with you. And when I was talking about the private sector there at the end, I wasn't talking about them in terms of the provision of care at all, because I agree that we have to, if you want, because of the different characteristics of care that I tried to talk about a little bit earlier at the onset of this webinar, I agree that it has to be publicly provided, because otherwise we get the type of model that is useless, both for the caregiver and the care receiver. What I meant when I said at the end, in terms of where there may be possibilities for change, is that I think that there has been some awakening in terms of some businesses in relation to the positive benefits of flexible working, or that it actually people working from home has been quite good, and that may free them up a little bit in moving further down the road to working from home or flexible work. So it was only in relation to that, not into the provision of care itself, just to clarify
that. And on that note, I think that links, we just lost Ulla, I think, but it links beautifully to the question that is in the chat right now, also posed by Christa. What are the changes, which changes are possible within the neoliberal health system, in the profit logic of a health system like the one you have described in your study from Gade? How and to what extent can these neoliberal structures be pushed back to make quality care and care for care workers possible? But also, I don't know who to address now, Malva or Ulla, if you want to respond to any of the other points that Elizabeth or Sarah have made, please feel free to come in. But I think the floor is really, I mean, the question really about how the profit logic can be changed in favor of care has been, and the need to do that has become so clear in your study. Ulla, you want to go?
Well, yes, this is a very political question. It's very much because I think everybody understands that this neoliberal way of running the country must come to an end. And for instance, this called the Health and Social Care Inspectorate, their study were very severe in how they wanted the system that we have to change, and that this division between the regions and the municipalities was definitely have to change, and also the treatment of the care assistants with paying them just on hour it must change. And that it was said that the reason why the staff was so big, large, of this type of employees was that they should be inspired to go to an education and learn more, and then they could be paid more. But that's a very cynic way, I think, of reasoning. But I think this early investigations that have been made have pointed at the big need for structural reformation altogether. And what I just mentioned about this functional responsibilities, functional divisions. Malva, do you hear me? Do you want to come in?
Yes, I hear you. I agree totally with you, and I think that really what Elizabeth and Sarah has been talking about, and you too as well, I think that what has been missing in Sweden and elsewhere, of course, has really been the like the focus on the reciprocal obligations from society. And at least in Sweden, all of the strategy for mitigating the spread of COVID-19 has been really centered on individual responsibility and overall individualization, and a lot of like individual discourses focusing either on blaming healthcare staff or you know pointing out racializing discourses. So I think that yeah, there is a need for structural change, but also as Sarah and Elizabeth just said, in a way that doesn't again turn it into the profit-driven kind of investments that we already see.
Yeah, and I would like to add there that the privatization tendencies have been very, very strong in Sweden, and the healthcare institutions are privatized, and the private healthcare institutions, in a larger extent, have employed nurses and assistant nurses on this hourly basis to a higher extent than the public. And that is the same way in school system, which is we're not talking about here, but education is also privatized, and the teachers there are lower paid and are less educated. So it is really a big political issue, this.
I would like to turn this last point, though, directly to a question for Elizabeth. A challenge that I see in even my own argumentation sometimes, and it relates to the slide with the red and the employment generation potential, so to speak, of investment in care. And the logic behind this argument to say investment in care will create more employment than investment in other sectors. And part of the argument is investment in care will create women's employment. Then how do we question, or how do we better understand what type of employment is in fact generated? Because not all of the employment that is generated may be decent work. It may be the type of employment that Ulla was just now referring to, or it may be the type of employment that Sarah was referring to at the very beginning when she said these 15-minute slots. So how can we, on the one hand, use this logic of emphasizing the importance of investment in care, and on the other hand, not kind of fall into the trap of commodifying care, of commodifying women's work, of using this argument and of incorporating women into a labor market that is in fact not a labor market that respects care as in its entirety, let's say.
Thank you very much, Silke. This is a key question of the struggles we have to really fight. So let me start from different aspects. One is now the public sector has a lot of money in the hand. By the way, we see the argument is not true, there is no money and the public sector needs to be slashed. Just once it's needed, be it for banks in the financial crisis, be it now in the pandemic, the money is here. That's important to keep in mind for the decades to come. So it's the public sector having a lot and kind of spending a lot of money. So the important factor is spend in public care or non-profit care organizations. That's the first thing. That's why I said before, we always need to be careful to link this decommodification demand to our care demand. So it's not only spending on care, but it's spending care in the public sector and non-profit sector. So by itself, the public sector employment is better in many cases than the private sector, even though it's in the care sector horrendous, also with time stress, with low paid, we know this society, low payment with bad quality of jobs, etc. So our point is, when we have in Austria do advocacy and hopefully gain people's power, is to link not only putting more investment in care jobs, but at the same time increasing pay in care jobs and improving the quality, which often means having more time. And actually, it should be ideally from a gender equality perspective linked to demands to reduce working time, especially in the care sector, but also across economies. And by the way, reducing working time is very much job promoting as well. So it's good economic policy as well. The other aspect, what you started off, is jobs for women. This is not true. In my slide, I will not put it back, but there is each of the columns, especially the second one, has red and also the more darker gray. So it creates jobs for both women and men. And this is due to the multiplier effect of investments in public childcare, in public health sector, in public elderly care. And these investments are also good economic policy because they create quite a large public revenue again, which again, so it's not like the net cost when you invest, but you get back a lot. For Austria, for example, in childcare, the revenues are as large as the spending. A couple of years later, you have that. So there is large multiplier effects to the economy. So overall, I think it's not easy, but it's making sure to put together these demands. And I am convinced that it's now time to put together people's power again. We have spent the last decades, especially on gender equality also, to do a lot of advocacy work, like directly with politicians, campaigns, etc. This is very important. But the seriousness of the problems with the neoliberal attack on everything, that's all services that provide well-being, etc., I think there's a need to go a step further and using women's power and people's power, including in the streets, of course, not only, but the seriousness of the issues, we really need to get stronger to make these large changes. And that's what we are trying to do, of course, at the small steps starting, but yes, step by step will succeed.
Before turning to Sarah, because there's a specific question for you, Sarah, in the chat, I wanted to alert you that there's also one comment by Krista in the chat to say that even public hospitals can function according to neoliberal principles. So we need to be quite clear and specific in this demand on what the not-for-profit logic means and the public means in the world that we live in. But Sarah, the question is from Mintam, and it's if we want to make the more equal shares of care work during the pandemic a sustained transformation. I mean, I think she's referring to your hinting at transfer of primary care to men in the family. What could be the behavioral changes among men and women in the family that we could push for?
Yeah, I suppose I should say, just to clarify, I think in some cases, men's care work increased. Women's, we know women's increased an awful lot more. So I don't want to give the wrong impression that suddenly men were in there giving it. Just we know that kind of, I suppose, necessity is the mother of invention. And in situations where, informal care provision by grandparents was withdrawn, schools and crashes were closed, and women were essential workers or healthcare workers, men in those households had to step up. And how can that continue? Well, I think maybe part of it is just an increased awareness. Maybe it was made more visible in those households about how much is actually carried by the women partner under normal conditions. So maybe increased awareness, just even the change in habits that have emerged within households over this last 12 months now. We've been at it. It feels like 12 years, 12 months. That those type of slowly changing social norms can sometimes lead to a transformation. But I think in practical policy terms, we're also it would need to include at a minimum, a maternity, paternity, parental leave that recognizes the nurturing needs of children and the emotional needs of parents. And that, there's a kind of carrot and stick approach to that. I suppose, obviously, the provision of accessible, affordable, quality childcare and adult care, and perhaps some changing of the kind of 24/7 work culture that's become synonymous with many white collar, career-led jobs, and changing the working day, increasing more flexibility, so that everyone has that quality time to give and receive care. I mean, as I say, I don't think there's any one solution to any of these things. It has to be a kind of a bundle of approaches.
I think, at least in my environment, many of the people who have fortunately survived COVID, but have been ill themselves, they are in fact a growing crowd of people questioning this logic. What is it that we would like to return to? So that's at least a group that we can hopefully incorporate among all of us who are questioning this exploitative logic, because it's such a terrible experience, and it makes you question life and the reliance on others. We need to come to an end. So, but there's one more question from Roxana. I find it very interesting, the approach in which the management of the pandemic, women have been forgotten. I'd like to hear thoughts on a possible contradiction in which actually the management of the pandemic, in which actually the management of the crisis in governments with neoliberal reforms has shifted the costs of care work on women. And now women are acting as subsidizers of government social costs. I think this is really very much of what we heard in both in all three contributions. I think, as I said, we need to come to an end, or we're coming to an end of our webinar. I would like to invite you, if you have the panelists, if you have any last reflections or thoughts to share with us. Do you have any last comments, Ulla? You need to unmute yourself. Let's unmute ourselves.
No, my reflection is that this neoliberal way is the wrong way forward, but it has going on for a very long time, and it has got very much integrated into the minds of people in general. We have still a social democratic prime minister, but they have very little power, I think, in the context of the other, well, in the neoliberal way of thinking. So it's hopefully, if they had listened to this webinar, also they can rethink or question what is the way forward. We can't go on like this. But there's a need for much advocacy, I think, and much research and knowledge building to turn around.
Thank you. Elizabeth, any last reflections that you would like to share?
Yes, based on what I said before, that now is a moment to really build women's power and people's power, and we can build it on a lot of knowledge. The last decades, there has been so much feminist knowledge being built and it's available. I think we need to get people on board, as many people as possible, building large movements. And the moment is, as somebody said now, I think it was you, Sarah, to use the health experience, like this experience of people that something is a danger, to use that and the health sector to make people understand how important it is, to tell the stories of why this neoliberal system is killing us all, actually, in virtually at the end, killing us and nature, and why we need to put people over profit and care at the center of the economy, and to make a convincing story. I think the pandemic is providing a crucial focus on health and our well-being, and we should use it to get a large movement going that puts people over profits.
Sarah, your last thoughts.
Nothing too much other than to, you know, I agree with what both Ula and Elizabeth have said. I mean, you know, there has been, of course, it's been felt differently across the world, and different people's experience of all this has been very different. There is also a universal thread to it in terms of showing us just how vulnerable we all are, and how unsustainable I think the current model is, and how interdependent we all are, and that we just try and make people keep sticking to those truths and that lesson, so that we do actually begin to change and build back better or build back new, and not just forget it and you know, go back as quickly as possible to some kind of normal, and lose that, you know, the possibility of it actually being a learning experience with all the grief and loss and sadness that has accompanied it. But I'd also like to say, Silke and the others, thank you very much for organising this. It's been a very enjoyable webinar.
I think, thanks, Sarah. Just as a matter of closing, I think one of the key points that I would like to highlight, also in the spirit of White Plus's efforts on feminist movement building, let's also not forget that in some ways, rich countries and we in rich countries are now experiencing some of the crises that people elsewhere in the world have experienced in much more intensity already, the impacts of austerity, of privatization, of indebtedness, etc., etc. So let's try and use this experience also as a lesson for international solidarity, and break the inward-looking moment that COVID in some ways has brought to all of us, that news have become so national, that focuses have become so national, that debates about access to immunization and the vaccines has become so national. Let's use this moment also for looking beyond our borders and our experiences, and relate the experiences that Europeans are making right now to the experiences of people in the global south and societies in the global south. On that note, I would like to close the webinar, thanking very much the panelists. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ula and Malva, for being with us. Thanks to all the participants who have been with us for this last hour and a half. Please consider joining us a week from today and 2 weeks from today. As I said in the beginning, a week from today, we will be looking at care chains and migrant domestic workers or migrant care workers in general, not only domestic workers, migrant care workers. And 2 weeks from today, we will be looking at anti-democratic trends and how authoritarian governments are using the pandemic to cut back on human rights and women's rights. Please come again, see you again. On behalf of White Plus, as the organizer, I would like to thank you very much for joining us tonight, and yeah, hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Silke. Bye-bye.